So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our first panel of the afternoon. Take a seat, Finance Minister, please. The title of our next session, our opening sort of panel discussion, is Can Cities and Their Disruptors Be Friends? And if you've been following the recent events here in Los Angeles and you caught the allusion in the mayor's remarks, that answer appears to be no. But perhaps there's wiggle room here. Perhaps cities and their disruptors can be eye to eye and be equals. And to really address this question, I'm going to invite up Michael Hurwitz from Transport for London, who has his poll. If you haven't logged into the WOVA app, do so now. I've been logging and answering his questions. And he's going to invite his panelists up to explore this issue. So Michael, I hand the stage to you.
Can anybody hear me? Yeah, you can hear me now. Thank you for staying. OK, just come up. Just come up. You don't know who these guys are, but please clap them. OK. So I'm going to sit down in a minute. We had a discussion, a preparation discussion, and we committed to you to do one thing, is that we were determined not to make this one of those vanilla panels, right, where I ask everybody to say their standard lines, and we all end up nodding vigorously at each other and saying we must collaborate. So today we're going to talk about fighting, we're going to talk about failure, and we're going to talk about, is there genuinely a way we can get through some of the tensions that we experience as cities or authorities or regulators and dealing with this really energetic, vibrant market that's coming. So I'm Michael Hurwitz. I'm Director for Transport Innovation at Transport for London. My job is to try and get the great version of future mobility and not the terrible version of future mobility. So I love everything to do with future mobility if it helps the city work effectively. I love it if it allows the socially disadvantaged to remain more engaged and more economically mobile. I love it if new solutions funnel people into an efficient transportation network. I like it less if future mobility takes 60 people out of a well-stacked London double-decker bus and smears them out into 50 pods. Yeah, I like it less if these are services that are only available to your tech-enabled affluent hipster. Yeah, it has to work for everybody, and that's why I'm here. And now I'm going to sit down and ask the panel. In fact, Roald, you've introduced yourself. Do we need to hear from him again? No, not yet. OK, so Roald, I think you've introduced yourself. Can I ask the other guys just to introduce yourself very briefly, say who you are and why you're involved in this discussion today?
Sure, thanks. So I'm Joshua Schank. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at LA Metro in the Office of Extraordinary Innovation. We accept unsolicited proposals from anyone in the private sector who has an interesting idea for a way that we should be partnering with them in order to tackle the mobility challenges that are ahead of us in LA. And we also do the strategic planning for the organization, which means we set the goals and objectives for what we're trying to achieve over the next 10 years. So that means we are in a position to try to figure out what partnerships with private sector and mobility players look like and how to ensure that we create positive public policy outcomes through those partnerships.
Thanks. By the way, I absolutely love the name of Joshua's business, the Office of Extraordinary Innovation. I would never get away with that in Britain. To me, that sounds like something from Harry Potter. But anyway, Daniel.
Hi, I'm Daniel Ramot. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of VIA. We provide software and solutions and also operate on-demand, advanced, tech-enabled public mobility solutions, anything from on-demand public transportation through school bus routing and tracking systems that provide parents and students visibility, through paratransit, medical transportation, and so forth. And our main goal is to work together with cities, with public transit authorities, to enable better public mobility, which is a space, and we can talk more about it, that I think has not benefited as much as it could from technology.
Thank you. And Seleta.
I'm Seleta Reynolds. I run the Los Angeles Department of Transportation. I'm also the chair of the Open Mobility Foundation. And I'm pretty sure I'm up here for a whole host of reasons. One of which is just to welcome you to Los Angeles, and we're so excited that you're here. But the other of which is really that LADOT, over the last 5 years or so, has tried to iterate towards a place where cities can be on equal footing with the technology companies that are pouring kind of unprecedented amounts of private venture capital funding into testing out new private mobility solutions on the public realm. And we hold that public realm and the public trust. And it's essential for us to be able to have a place where we're achieving what Michael's talking about, which is that we're nudging those solutions to solve real problems.
Great. Okay, so we're about to kick off. If you haven't voted in the polls, if you go into the Hoover app, now on the opening page, there's like top left, it says polls. So I'm going to involve you soon. So if you haven't voted, please do it now. But I'm going to kick off. So I promised to talk about fighting. Okay?
It sounded like you said farting when you said that. I'm just going to say. And I was like, are we going to, I mean, I have 2 kids. I guess I
Whatever's
could.
on
But
the table,
that doesn't
it's
seem
fine.
relevant. Right.
We could.
Maybe jetpacks.
Yeah.
Kind of a related technology.
Maybe. Yeah. Okay.
Got it. But fighting. Cool. I'm cool with that.
Fighting.
Better. That's much better.
Fighting. Okay. So we have Via on the stage. You know, we both have history with some famous ride-sharing company in particular.
No idea what you're talking about.
But it's not just that. You know, I mean, I was the one in London who, when the dockless bikes came, we had to sign the order to remove some of them because they were not acting properly. But we also created a framework where they can try an experiment. You're involved in a current, very active debate on the mobility data standard, and you've had a recent objection or a recent challenge. Can you tell us about what is going on?
Sure. So about a year and a half ago, LADOT had been working really hard and thinking about how we were going to manage the sort of digital public realm. And you know, we were watching as kind of increasingly we were losing control, and we were doing a lot of policy making in the dark. And we also had tremendous pressure from policymakers and other folks who were sort of distracted by really shiny objects that was pulling us away from kind of the fundamental work of reshaping the public realm and streets to make it easier for people to get around without driving. And so we started to play around with a bunch of kind of bold ideas, and scooters showed up. And one of those ideas was that we would be able to create a set of APIs that would gather a small amount of information in service of managing and regulating things that move on our streets and in the sky, and maybe sometimes underneath the ground if you have somebody who's tunneling under your city. So we were doing that, and then when scooters showed up, it seemed to me like a moment in time opportunity to be able to use that tool to open the market up completely. As regulators, a lot of times, the more information we have, the more calm we feel, and the price of that information sharing should be that new companies and new ideas can then come and sort of test out their ideas on our streets. So we did that. We published those in open source, and we required that if you wanted to have a dockless program in Los Angeles, you had to meet our insurance requirements, you had to do some community outreach, we had equity incentives, and then you needed to give us 6 pieces of data so that we could be assured that you were following the rules that we laid out. And so that was, you know, in place from the very beginning, and we had about 9 companies come in. If they had all hit their caps, we would have 160,000 scooters on the streets of Los Angeles. So we were serious. We opened the market up. We didn't put a limit on the number of companies because we really wanted to give this new mode a shot. About 7 out of 8 of those companies complied from the very beginning.
About 7.
Yeah. 7 of them, but it took a while. This was a new idea, so we gave everybody plenty of room to kind of build to this tool and to catch up with what we were asking for, and everybody did, with one exception. And they, even though Jump/Uber had sort of signed on to be part of the pilot from the beginning and knew what the data requirements were going to be, we reached a point where we could no longer sort of continue negotiating because it was clear that because they have several concerns, they were not going to comply. So then we offered them an appeals process. So they get a general manager's hearing, and then they get a hearing before the Transportation Commission to see if, when we suspended their permit, if we acted properly within our regulatory authority.
Yep. Okay. And how's it feeling at the moment? Does it feel tense?
Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah.
It's not my preference. I would much rather be at the table, which we are with a lot of these other companies, learning together and kind of figuring out together how this is going to work best for everyone to achieve the outcomes that we have, because this is bold new stuff for cities to do, and it's, I think, an exciting moment for companies and cities to actually co-design a tool.
Yeah.
But it just has kind of deteriorated to the point where that collaboration is no longer happening. And I think it's a bad outcome for the city, it's a bad outcome for that company, it's a bad outcome for all of the cities who are using this same tool. And there are about 88 cities around the world that are using the mobility data specifications.
Roald, can I ask, do these tensions exist in Europe in the same way?
Well, I think when you're asking about fights, I could think of several fights. Fights about data, with OEMs, for an example. I could also think of fights to balance safety and new creative inventions. And we were, for example, the first country in Europe that allowed the Tesla on the road, but we have not yet allowed e-scooters on our roads. And I think they illustrate the balancing act we're trying to make. We have a lot of bikes. We have a lot of pedestrians on our sidewalks. We have very narrow streets, so until this date, we have not been able to approve e-scooters the way they are because we believe they're not safe enough. That is a balancing act, a fight, so to say, between creativity and between new safety regulations we have. We also see a fight in our streets between cars and bikes. In some places in Amsterdam, it takes longer for bikers to pass a traffic light than it takes for cars to pass a traffic light. So I would say just think for a moment. I'm sure you've been in a traffic jam where in a car you have to wait 3 times before the green light is yours. So in Amsterdam we see that for bikes. You're in a traffic jam on your bike. You have to wait 3 times before the traffic light is yours. So there it's a fight between space for cars and for bikes. And bikes there are winning the fight, so to say. But we're Dutch, so we're not fighting in a way that we knock out each other. We think a fight is meant to make each other better. And that, I think, is also part of our DNA.
Yeah, maybe we need a different word to fight. But that's interesting. I think many of the city planners in the room would be quite jealous if those are your problems, is that it's getting harder and harder because of the popularity of cycling. But thank you, that's a great example. Okay, I'm going to move on. And now I want to go to you guys. I want to hear what your opinion was. So we're going to talk about failure now. Because there's a hard, uncomfortable truth that at the moment, most transportation is subsidized one way or the other, either by the taxpayer or by VC or investors. So Hannah, can we have the first question on the screen? There we go. So I asked you this. So if I gave you $100 and you had to invest, I didn't want to give you a none of the above option. I hope I got most of the examples of things that are either demonstrated here that you would have thought of. Which one would you choose? Okay, let's see what the results are. I don't know what the results are. Who wins? That's a long way away from me. Is that e-bikes? Hyperloop was more popular than I thought, but listen, I'm keen to learn about it today. But this is a really, really interesting question about how to make money, because I think if you look about it now, people have placed their bets, and what we see now will not be what endures in the future. And I think this raises really big questions about what will happen in the future. Are we going to see consolidation? Are we going to see things fading away? So I want to bring in Daniel. I want to bring in Daniel here because we've seen the rise and the demise of some quite famous areas, and you're one of the world leaders in demand responsive services. Chariot isn't here anymore, Bridge isn't here anymore, but you're still standing. Why is that?
It's a good question. I think just so the narrow comparison to Bridge and Chariot, I think, is very simple. Both those companies ran fixed route. They try to, as I understand it, try to identify gaps in the existing public transit system and then run fixed route shuttles to try to fill in those gaps. That's entirely different from what we are doing. At VIA, we provide technology that enables fully dynamic routing, uses a tremendous amount of data to predict where demand is going to come from, and then in real time, as people submit requests for transportation into the system, we match them with vehicles that are routed fully dynamically to, and adapt to that demand and try to maximize the seat utilization. So it's just a completely different model that is far more tech-enabled, and I think that's, to me, that's probably the core reason that we are able to be successful. I would say it is not, so one thing I would caution is that there is a reason that this sort of mode, on-demand transit, is not ubiquitous so far. I think it's growing in popularity, becoming far more accepted and adopted. It is actually, the technology turns out to be quite difficult, if I do say so myself, to make work. It's very easy to run a system where people book a ride and get paired with a taxi or with a ride-hailing car. It may be even relatively easy to get people to opt for a shared ride. To actually get 3, 4, 5, 6 people into every vehicle every hour turns out to be quite difficult and also not possible in every scenario. So if you think that on-demand transit is going to solve all of your transportation problems, that is also not the case. And I think having the expertise to say it's going to work here, it's not going to work there, and then implementing the technology in the right way and having the right algorithms, that's what makes it possible to be successful.
So, please,
Can I ask about that? Because I think, Joshua, y'all have experience running some demand-responsive transit. LADOT has done a couple of pilots ourselves, and there were a lot of there's a lot of commentary out there about the relative cost per passenger of running those services. And I think that's just the wrong thing to focus on. And I also think that I wonder a little bit how we will ever answer that question of where it works and where it doesn't unless we actually go out and try it. And in the case of demand-responsive transit, I'm not sure that anybody other than the public sector can make the investment to make it happen. Is that true?
Okay, and I think there's then a debate. There are many things to consider here, but I would say in our experience, running a service like this in a very dense environment like Manhattan in New York, if you're able to invest to grow ridership, which requires considerable investment, not single-digit millions of dollars in our experience, you can build a service that has enough scale where the cost per ride is very low. I would argue actually competitive even with Manhattan buses. We have some data for our service in New York where the cost of moving a person, say, from the Upper West Side to the Upper East Side might be cheaper than putting that person on an MTA bus, for example. I'm not trying to compete with buses in any way, but that's a route that's very tough in Manhattan, to cross Manhattan for buses. So I think if you have the money to invest and you do it in a very dense environment, it is possible to make it very cost effective. But as you say, I don't think that's the right way to think about it, or that's the right use case. I think what we're trying to do is get people out of cars. And we can try to do it with buses, but in sparse environments where there's not a lot of density, it's going to be very, very expensive to do it in a bus and probably not going to work very well for the passengers. I think that's where demand response can come in. And then, yes, it's not going to be super cheap to move every person, but it's much cheaper than any other alternative.
Yeah. It's interesting, in London, so we're doing a trial, and you're one of the companies involved in our trials. We're not doing this to make money, we're doing this to lose less money than we would normally. Yeah? And actually genuinely giving people an opportunity to not choose their car, this is something that feels closer, and the customer leap. City planners love buses, right? It's the most efficient, it's a leveler, it gets huge numbers of people across the network quickly. But the reality is that, for many people, a bus is a big thing that takes you not quite from where you're going from, not quite where you're going to, and in the middle you sit next to somebody who you wouldn't have chosen to sit next to, right? So that jump from the car to this service, I think, is far more effective. Josh, I want to bring you in, because we've spoken about this in the past, is that at the moment, we still don't know which one of these investment bets is going to work. Where do you think it's going to end up? Do you think we're going to have consolidation into one or two big players, or is everything going to fade away in the public sector, or the traditional operators going to pick up the pieces?
So I think I've been thinking about the 5 stages of grief and then the 5 stages of new mobility, right? I think there's a parallel there because when we
The 5
started
stages
out,
of autonomy also.
What's that?
5 stages of autonomy.
Yeah, well,
could just go.
everything has 5 stages.
That's right.
But there are 5 stages of grief, and I think that in the new mobility, we've gone through a lot of phases, a lot of iterations. Right? When it first came out, people like me were like really excited. This is awesome. Look at this cool stuff. And then eventually we started to panic, right? Because we were like, oh my God, this is destroying our cities and destroying transit. And then we kind of got into this, oh, well, maybe we could work together type of stage, right? And we started to do that and realized that that was very difficult because we had such competing different goals and objectives. But now I think we are starting to see those goals and objectives narrow and come together. And one of the reasons for that is that you kind of started off this panel by noting and then had this poll that very clearly make the assumption that transportation in cities is not really a viable business model, which is, I think, something that most of us who've worked in this area have known for a really long time, but was not commonly held as a belief for the last 4 years among people who are operating private mobility companies. So as that starts to happen more and more, you're going to have real partnerships that are essentially going to be what we have today in urban transit, which is a subsidy of private sector operators or mobility providers by the public sector where it makes sense to achieve the public policy goals we care about. That's got to be the end game because the for-profit sector is not the place to finance urban transportation. It really doesn't work well. You get all kinds of skewed outcomes like we have today where we've got oversaturation of vehicles availability. We've got major congestion and environmental degradation that is resulting in part from these providers, and we're not achieving the kind of equity and equitable outcomes that we'd like to achieve. So I think you're going to see more and more partnerships that are meaningful, like the one we've started with VIA on experimenting, bringing people to and from our stations in 3 stations in Los Angeles County. I think you're going to see more of those because those are a model that has a shot of being sustainable.
Well, and it's hard to learn in public with public dollars. And I think that's something that is incumbent upon all of us to try and shift the conversation a little bit so that there is a broader understanding of why a city or a county or any kind of government would make some investment in something like this that isn't necessarily tried and tested yet, and that we still need to figure out where it will have that return, and then to change the conversation about ROI. Because the return on investment for not just moving people out of their cars, which is essential, but connecting them to opportunity and opening up their lives. The microtransit service we operate on the west side is in a transit desert, and it's anchored in a housing development called Mar Vista Gardens. Those folks they don't own cars. They're older adults. They're people with disabilities. They only relied on our really, really miserable paratransit service, which is extremely difficult to use, just to go to the grocery store or to go to the doctor's office. And so to open up those folks' lives and opportunity, the return on that investment is not direct. If they're out there and able to get a job, get a promotion, be well, have a sense of well-being, those are indirect returns to the overall economy, and only the public sector can play that game, and we have to start talking about the ROI in that way so that we get off of this cost per passenger discussion.
Yeah, I agree. I think it all goes back to starting with what you're trying to achieve, which is something that in the private sector is a little bit easier because you're generally trying to achieve making money, and the public sector is a little more challenging. And I think that looking at a cost per passenger as being what you're trying to achieve is really narrow. I mean, you just described so many other outcomes that we care about, and I think, Michael, you described it very well. If you're losing less money on something and you're achieving more things, then that's a success. Yeah. And believe me, let me tell you, it is very, Seleta will back me up with this, and Michael, I'm sure, it is very easy to be risk averse in the public sector. I mean, people are going to jump all over any new thing you do and try to brand it a failure in a minute and a half. And it is even harder internally to get buy-in for trying new things because of that fear of failure.
Yeah.
So we have to be able to experiment. We have to be able to try these things as we sort out all this new technology.
And Roald,
Can I add an extra perspective
yeah,
to
please,
this?
please, Roald.
I got a microphone, but I suppose you can hear me.
Maybe use the handheld, I think.
Is this
That's
is this
better.
Yeah, because I would like to add an extra perspective to this. I would side with the public in going for the e-bike as the best investment, both from the private sector perspective as well as the public sector perspective. In my country, actually, e-bikes are better selling than traditional bikes. So purely from the turnover perspective, they're a lot more expensive. It's a good investment to invest in e-bikes. But also from the public perspective, what we see is traditionally people would take their traditional bike for trips up to 5 miles. That goes up to 10 miles or even 12 miles. So people are getting out of their cars onto their bikes, which is a good thing from the public perspective. So investing in infrastructure to promote biking is turning out very positive because it reduces congestion, but it also improves health. We're also facing an obesity crisis, so that is an extra plus, I would say. And also what we see is that people in their 70s and 80s can still keep biking just because of the electric bike being available. So I think it is the best investment from the public perspective, but it should, I think, also be so from the private perspective.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're gonna move on now. Can we queue up the next poll? So, next one. There we go. Question for you, and there's 2 questions that we're gonna do quickly. So this is about trust. You know, who do you want to provide your services? Yeah. Kind of easy question. Who would you trust the most to give you a tailored, innovative service? Startup, traditional transportation provider, or an authority, government? What was the answer for this one? One sec. Okay. Startups win. I'm with you, actually. You know, there's a thing in transportation planners are great. I love them. I work with them the whole time. But I wouldn't say they're necessarily predisposed to coming up with the creative service. Yeah? So the next question, and this was deliberately to contrast. Can we see that question just to remind you? This is a slightly different version. But then who would you trust with your data? And I'm interested to see, I genuinely don't know the result to this one. What was the result for that one, Hannah? Okay, interesting. You trust the government, huh?
This is an international crowd. It's an international crowd.
Yeah.
You're not surprised, I hope.
Well,
Must be a crowd full of Europeans.
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, there we go. Listen, you know, I ask it to provoke that response. But this is a really interesting point because, and there's something I think with the misalignment of incentives, as you said, Josh, you know, a business has to make money, it has investors, it's responsible for providing a return. But the service that you want to use, and I think I'm asking this question because we have to bring customers into this. How do you want to get about? Who do you want to deal with?
Right.
And let's ask this question. How do you create a system of trust? Maybe it's we own the data and we make it open to everybody. I have a lot of discussions with the operators in the UK to say, well, will you give me some data back? And the answer is normally no, because it's seen as commercially sensitive. Mm-hmm. But where does it come from? I mean, Seleta, I can kind of guess your answer. But Daniel, you know, you had the audience here voted for you as the person most likely to give them a service they want. But they also referred to you as the people they trust the least. Why do you think that is?
I hope it's not true. Look, I think that there is an implicit trust that we have to put in government, even here in the United States, where I think people are a bit more skeptical about government than maybe elsewhere. With our personal data, with our we file taxes with the IRS. That we're very comfortable sharing our most sensitive personal data with government bodies. I think when we're looking at startups and for-profit companies, you know, maybe the answer would have been different a few years ago, but with everything that's happening with social media, that trust has been eroded. And I suspect that some of this battle that we're having here in LA between this private operator and the city about data, it really starts from a lack of trust. I think that if there had been, and you know, this is the result of several years now of private mobility operators operating, and I don't think VIA fits in this category, but others operating in a way that was either rogue or didn't work with the city at all, try to work around the city in some cases quite aggressively, and that's led to just a breakdown of the trust. And so now the city of LA says, well, if you're going to operate here, I need to see all of your data, otherwise, or 6 pieces of data, right, which feels more than the company wants to share. If there was a ton of trust, maybe you'd feel more comfortable without some of it. I don't know, and that's something we just need to repair. I think that's going to take time. We have to repair the public's trust, as it turns out from this survey, and also cities' trust, gain it back. That's something we need to work on.
Actually, I'm going to tell you just a personal reflection of how these relationships go for me in London. And I don't know whether any others feel the same, is that the authority, we have duties, we have legal duties. So in the UK, the Highways Act 1980, I have a legal duty to assert the rights of the public and to promote safety. I have to do it legally. And there's a tendency, therefore, for me to to go all regulator on you, to bring the shutters down and say, this is the way it has to be. And the thing that we've tried to do in the last couple of years, and it's a very simple phrase which has been very uncomfortable for us to say about new issues. It's 3 words: I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to solve this problem. Can we have a discussion about how to do it? Is there a deal here that if I just share with you a bit more about what I'm worried about or what I'm working on, will you not come and just dump everything on us and try and go for that launch and defend strategy? And that you have to keep saying it, and I think there's a time, it takes a while for people to believe you. But do you think that works? Do you think it's about sharing problems, or do you think there's an inherent tension between the objectives of the city or the government and the commercial entity?
Well, I think it's changing. I mean, there was a lot of inherent tension when we first saw all this transition happening. But now, as these companies are realizing that there's no profit in it for them, that they're in this current model, they're looking for other alternatives. I mean, the issue is, I think you bring up a great point about regulation, which is that the history of regulation by government bodies is not a pretty picture. There's a lot of examples of over-regulation, not just in cities, but of transportation in general, that have stymied innovation and prevented us from achieving the goals we care about. And one of them is the taxi cab industry itself, which was over-regulated for many, many years in most cities and created the environment where a disruptor could come in with something completely different and way better than what existed because of that severe over-regulation and lack of innovation. So I agree with you that we don't know what that appropriate regulation or regulatory environment or subsidy looks like yet. And again, that's why I think this type of experimentation is so critical, so we can start to figure these things out. We're doing one experiment right now with VIA, but we're about to embark on another one next year where we're going to use our own operators to run a microtransit service and use the private sector technology to help us plan and figure out where that service should go and what it should look like. So there are lots of different ways of doing this, and you're right, no one knows what the right answer is.
So, okay, I want to leave a couple of minutes for questions, because I want to ask you all a quick question. I want a quick answer. If they go on too long, start heckling, please, because the clock is running down. So, I'd like people in the room or watching this today to come away with something they can try. So there's a huge amount of experience on the panel. A lot of war stories, a lot of scars, a lot of more positive experiences. But it would be great if people could come out of this room and say, actually, I think maybe I'll try that. So the thing what we're doing at the moment is that we're doing some really interesting work about procurement. Yeah, so we are trying to demonstrate lots of different ways where we can bring startups or creative companies, or actually big suppliers, to work with us on innovation. The key thing we're doing, by the way, is we do nothing unless there's a route to market. Anybody can demonstrate anything. But for example, autonomy technologies, right? We've done a demonstration with startups. We did a deal with 5 of the bus operators in London to say, listen, if we get some great companies, will you actually put them on your buses? And what's the prize? Well, there's a prize of working with the operators, but if it's successful, we may put it in the bus standards. It becomes a requirement everywhere. So the thing that we do, find things with a genuine route to market. So can we just come along? I don't know who wants to go first. Give the guys here one idea of something they should go out of this room and try in their companies or in their authority.
I'll give you two ideas. One is just to try that e-bike, and the second one is try to develop an IT application that enables people to really make a choice from how to go from A to B. At a certain time of the day, what is my best choice? And not just one modality, but combining them. So if I want to go to my soccer match, or my work, or my family, should I take a combination of bike, train, and car? Should I take one of them? Is it going to cost me? So an integrated IT application that enables me to make the decision to quickly or cheaply get to my destination, I think would be something I'd hope, especially in an environment here in LA, that people would try to develop.
Thank you, Roald. Who wants to go next? Josh?
Yeah, I'll throw something out there. I mean, I'm biased because I work for a transit agency, but I think that the data backs me up that transit is the backbone of how cities are going to move around forever. That is how it is now, and it's going to be that way for a long time for a number of reasons having to do with economics and agglomeration, people being near each other. So if that's the case, if you've got a new idea, a way to feed into that transit system, to work with that transit partner, go and figure out what they're trying to accomplish. Read their strategic plan. Think about how you can fit your idea into their business model, and come to them with that. Don't just go out there and assume that they will love your new technology because it's a new shiny object, as Seleta said. Think about it instead about how it achieves the goal that they're trying to achieve.
And they're going to be around for a long time because, as we said, you're going to keep subsidizing it, right? That service is going to stay there, so work a way to fit in. Thank you. Daniel?
I would like to encourage you, and it doesn't have to be using VIA technology, but if you are thinking about building transit or increasing use of the transit system, to consider an on-demand solution for first, last mile. We've found that to be incredibly effective at driving use of fixed route, high-speed, high-throughput modes like trains, commuter rails, and BRT. And I think if you have the ability to try something like that in your city or agency, I would encourage you to do it.
Thank you. Seleta?
I would say, first and foremost, put more women and people of color in charge in your companies. And hire more women and people of color in your government so that your leadership looks like the cities that you want to serve, because you'll come across more interesting problems and you'll come across more realistic solutions if you do that. And then the second thing is just be more honest about the true barriers to mass market adoption of all of these new mobility ideas in the United States. That is 100% about the fact that our streets do not feel safe and comfortable for people of all ages and abilities to ride a bike, to ride a scooter. The data that I collect and that debate is a distraction from the real thing that is going to plateau those businesses. So let's get together and build more protected bike lanes.
Thank you. On your point about diversity, by the way, and here's something really, really practical you can do. So in TfL, we manage our business through a balanced scorecard. And one of the items on the scorecard is how far we represent the people we serve in terms of diversity and ethnicity and gender. We're amber at the moment. We're getting closer.
And how much you pay them.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. OK, thank you. We do have a couple of minutes for audience questions. Do we have a roving mic or anything like that? Do we have a roving mic, or do you have to shout? OK, one hand went straight up at the back. Thank you for your enthusiasm. A microphone is Can you shout? Oh, no, OK, we've got a microphone coming.
I love this panel.
Thank you. Stop. Thank you very much, everybody.
My question is about, do we feel that our priorities might be backwards? I just paid $8.60 to ride a bird scooter from Union Station here. The Lyft car was cheaper. The Uber car was cheaper. There were no jump bikes for me to hop on, and I can't get my TAP Metro thing to freaking work on the bikes anymore because I'm a visitor. I'm not a resident. Why are we asking the companies to build the bike lanes? We don't ask Ford or Toyota or GM or VW, Chrysler, any of them to build the streets for the cars. I would like to know why we're putting the onus on the good guys.
So let me be straight up. I'm not asking companies to build bike lanes, but companies have platforms to reach a market, to build a constituency, to come advocate and build the political will necessary for me to go in and make the trade-offs on our streets to build those bike lanes. So it is not about me asking them to fund those, but when I go into a neighborhood and I say I want to take away a lane of traffic and give it to a protected bike lane, and I get 40 people to show up, even when we try and recraft the way we talk to people, this isn't a direct service that these companies offer, but it is a huge opportunity for us to reach a much wider audience that can become the constituency to allow me to prove that it exists.
Yeah, and Josh, thank you. And Josh just whispered he'll sort out your card later. Okay. Do we have any more questions?
Terrible.
Yes, another very enthusiastic hand. Thank you, sir.
So we have the challenge in California and elsewhere to build more housing, particularly housing near transit. That makes a lot of sense. Aging in place makes a lot of sense. But when we talk about aging in place, we also bump up against some safety concerns that get raised by people who are aging in place when it comes to things like scooters, e-bikes, sidewalks, streets. What can government and private companies do to protect people together and to build support for both strategies? Because otherwise we're going to be bumping up against each other all the time.
Thank you. Can I answer? I'm going to answer. So, the most important thing actually is you need a dialogue, but you need to have two things. The first is you need to know what problem you're solving. So what you're aiming for. You're not just trying the technology for the sake of trying it. You need to be doing it towards a positive end and a positive outcome. And then the most important thing I would say is that you need to, and it's the point that Josh and I were talking about earlier, you need to create a space where you can try and work out what the long-term sustainable system needs to be. So you mustn't jump to regulation too quickly. And I think it comes back to the thing you need is that deal. Create yourself the space to learn, have the open dialogue to share the data, and then, and only then, do you set the framework which hopefully you'll meet more of those outcomes, both commercial and societal. Okay.
Can I add my
please,
voice
Rob.
there? Because I think what we have some good experiences with is sharing the street into 3 speed lanes. 1 for cars, 1 for pedestrians, and 1 for in between. And in our country, it's mostly bikes, but you could envisage scooters and other new mobility on that lane. I mean, you need the space, and of course, in many cases, you need to rebuild the public space. But I think the safety aspect is speed. Very slow speed people combining with faster speed people is dangerous, especially also for the elderly. So that could be an option that we are testing in the Netherlands.
Okay. I'm sorry, I've seen a couple of other hands go up. I'm really sorry, but we're out of time. Thank you for your polling. Thank you for your participation. And I just wanted to thank the panel. But most of all, I want to ask you all to do one thing. You've heard 4 suggestions. Please take something away from this panel and do it. Because otherwise, you might have taken some notes, you might have looked, and you might have nodded. But as Mayor Garcetti said right at the beginning, this is only going to happen if we try and work together and collectively try and push towards a sustainable, equitable, effective mobility system in the world. So thank you very much, and see you again.